The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Capehart with the APS Technical Assistance Resource Center. Welcome to the webinar. The title of today's webinar is Technology Additions, Tips on Implementing New Software, and I'll introduce our speaker and panelists shortly. Next slide. A quick disclaimer before we get started. The National Adult Maltreatment Reporting System, or NAMERS, and the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center, APS TARC, are a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, administered by WRMA Incorporated. The contractors and our speakers' findings, conclusions, and points of view do not necessarily represent U.S. Administration for Community Living official federal government policy. Next slide. A little note about our APS TARC, although I suspect everybody on the phone is pretty familiar with it, but we're here to help APS programs in any way that we can. Just reach out to us at any time. There'll be some contact info displayed at the end of the webinar. We have special funds allocated to helping formula grantees, so everybody on this call or on this webinar has even extra support. We work to enhance the effectiveness of APS programs by working with partners on use of data and analytics, applying research and evaluation to practice, and encouraging the use of innovative practices and strategies. Next slide. Please consider joining one of our peer-to-peer calls. I think these calls are especially helpful for formula grantees, especially the one at the end of each month. You see there the administrators managers call, which is the fourth Wednesday of each month. But we do have 3 calls per month, one for investigators, one for supervisors, and then that last one I mentioned for administrators. The schedule for these calls is on your screen, but you can also get this schedule on our website, which you'll see the information at the end of the webinar, and you can contact us if you'd like to subscribe to our listserv and register for these calls each month. They can be very helpful. Talk to other administrators. Next slide. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Today's slides will be posted at a later date along with the recording of today's webinar. All participants are muted for this webinar, and you can use your computer or telephone to access audio. Please adjust the volume to your desired level. If you have any problems with the audio or viewing the presentation, we recommend that you exit the webinar and then re-enter. That often fixes whatever issues are popping up. Next slide. If you have questions of our presenters, simply type them in the questions box at any time. We'll pause for questions at the end and we'll get to as many of them as possible, but you do not have to wait till the end. You can type your questions whenever they occur to you and we will get to them. The session is being recorded and it will be posted to the web at a later date. We'll notify via email everybody who's registered and all the formula grantees when this is posted online. Also, you'll receive an automatically generated email in 24 hours with a link to a certificate of attendance, just in case you would like to hold on to that. Next slide. So I'd like to introduce today's speakers and a couple of panelists that we have. Our primary speaker is Phillip Calloway, who's a business analyst and consultant with the Office of Information and Resource Management at the Administration for Community Living, and he's also the APS TARC technology subject matter expert. Phillip's been involved in a variety of technology initiatives over his many years. You may be working with Phillip individually if you request technical assistance from the APS TARC. And then we also have a couple panelists today who we'll hear from a bit later. Both are with the state of Massachusetts at the Disabled Persons Protection Commission, or DPPC. We have Heidi Cresta, the Director of Quality Assurance, and Jean Frejust, who's the Director of Information Technology. Again, you'll hear from them closer to the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Phillip Calloway.
Welcome, everyone. As Andrew stated, I am a business analyst and a technology consultant for OIRM and with ACLIT. I'm excited to work with APS Technical Assistance Resource Center as a subject matter expert in technology. I want to make it clear I'm not an APS process or operations expert. I'm here for technology support. Some of the language that I actually may have may be different from what you're used to. However, we are working together to simplify this and help you understand technology solutions. So if there is a term or a process that you need further clarity on, jot it down and ask your question during the question and answer. We do have APS process resources on the line in case there's a process clarity that's needed. My background is in software implementations and big data. I worked as an IT consultant on projects with WMATA, the NSA, Citigroup, and HSBC. In addition, I've completed 9 lifecycle software implementations and 3 upgrades. I'm here to advise and to help. So there are a couple of takeaways that I want you to note. Next slide. Our learning objectives here are to find your team, identify the roles and the key players that you need to be successful, then define your success, create a plan, a timeline, and a budget, clearly define your process, establish your requirements, review your data, revisit your plan, and track your progress. Next slide. So finding your team. Give some thought on who you'll be partnering with to complete your task in terms of implementing your software. I'm not familiar with the APS acquisition process. However, I've been told by our team that it should be a major emphasis on getting to know your local acquisition partner. You should familiarize yourself with this process also to make sure that you've allotted enough time for this process to take hold. Sometimes it can be longer than you expect. Also, in the same context, someone will have to help install and implement and integrate the software for you. Don't panic. This should be your local IT department. You should also find a partner there. Familiarize yourself with your local IT department. You're responsible for identifying your IT partner, and you don't have to worry about actually doing the install. So start making these relationships. So you have project roles and you have system roles. The project roles would be like your project manager, your subject matter expert. That would be the person that actually knows about your processes, like your operations, and then also your IT leader, your director or IT manager, and a developer. On the system side, you would need to know like who's going to be the person that is going to be training, who should be trained, who's going to run your reports, and will you need new roles created. For example, you may not have a super user, but you may need a super user for this particular software or a team lead. Next slide. Define success. So before you take the big leap in choosing and implementing a technology solution, define what you want the product to, what you want to get from the product. At minimum, what is the solution required for you to do for you? So some of you guys may just wanted to capture data. You may want the ability to have it to put have input data from computers, or not just computers, maybe even handheld devices, tablets, and phones. Create reports, push notifications to users. So define what you actually would once the software is implemented. What would you call success? Again, I'm not an APS software expert, but defining your success is key to defining your scope. So the scope is also a piece of something that you should look at in the functions of the software. So your core functions are something that you should look at. What functions should the software cover? Maybe mobile features, photo capturing, documentation management, maybe metrics. Those are some of the things that you may want to take in consideration. So you probably won't get everything you want. However, I'm being told from your resource center, get as close to acceptable as you can. You won't get everything, but you might just get close to acceptable. So in the same instance, some things can be pushed to the back of the line, some features or some functions. So in the same instance, you could say, okay, I can get photo capturing and documentation management. I want metrics. However, I don't have time to do it, or I don't have the staff to do it. So we can implement that at another time. This is called a phased approach. So you could break things into phases. You might not get everything in the first phase, but I would suggest you break it into phases so that you can put it where you have your optimal times for your staff and your resources. Next slide. Items to consider in creating a plan. So your timeline is actually your plan. Your timeline is documented and called the project plan. You can detail your project plan or get help from your IT department to do that. Planning this work and executing the tasks are paramount to your success. Once you execute, measuring and documenting the work completed will help in assessing the health of your project. So we have milestones. A milestone is a marker in your timeline that accents a certain goal. So these should be achievable and realistic. In the same instance, tasks should be timed and adjusted to meet your need. So sometimes you have high volume seasons of work and your resources are constrained, or you'll have high vacation time or holiday time. That should be considered when you are actually putting together your timeline or your project. Another thing that you should take in consideration is budget and funding. This is included in your planning. So sometimes there are priority conflicts. Sometimes there are things that take priority over your actual task. So you should consider this as part of your funding and budgeting. With budgeting, you should also look at the licensing. If you're getting software that requires licensing, you should examine sometimes licensing actually has what the first year for licensing, the fees will be minimal, but the second year they will double. So in that same instance, you would look at the total cost of licensing. I would inquire about licensing over a 3 to 7 year period. So licensing is one piece of it. And then the next piece we look at is examining the total cost of ownership for the solution. So the total cost includes things like service enhancements and maintenance. Let's just say that you have mapped your product to your processes, and you've started to use it, and you realize you need 2 more fields, or law changes, and you say, let's say the laws or some rules of your local entity changes, and you have to create 4 or 5 more fields. They're needed for your software. So those things that you have to consider and budget for in your plan. Next slide. Define your process. So here's where sometimes it's we require the help of what we call our subject matter experts or someone in operations to jump in and look at our procedures and get a consensus on what our requirements are. Write your requirements out and make sure that they are pretty solid with your operations leaders. Then you want to map your requirements to the technology solution. So whatever software you decide to choose, you want to be able to look at the functionality of that particular software and make sure that meets your need in terms of the requirements that you have and the procedures and operations that you use. This may be the time that you review some of your processes and your procedures and say, okay, we did want to change something up, or we did want to streamline some things. This may be the time for you to actually do that particular thing in terms of streamlining your processes. Next slide. Review your data. Your data is a big piece of your implementation. So you need to clean your data up and review your reports. So if your current system has reporting, you need to look at your current reports and see, okay, see the life cycle of these reports. Some reports may be outdated and old and may not have been used for a while, and some data may be. Some of us know that our data is not. There's bad data in our system. So I would suggest to take a quick look at your data and clean it up. And for the new system, you should establish rules that will allow minimizing the input of bad data. So when you do that, that's called edits and standards. So if a user goes in and gets ready to input a city and he misspells the city, the system will not take the name because there's an edit there that requires him to put the correct city name in, or it actually gets to choose the city. He has to choose the city from a list. You can do that. So edits and standards for your data, clean up your data, and also look at your reports, reconcile your reports to make sure that they meet your retention policies, and even whatever your retention policy is, even if you decide that you still want to bring it forward, make sure you're not bringing forward bad data. All right, next slide. Track your progress. So once you've done all this, you've got your plan in place, you've got your requirements in place, you know what the software that you're going to purchase, and you've mapped your software to your particular operation functions. You want to look at you want to track what you've mapped. So you create tasks, and you task those. Once you have your tasks, put those to the plan, map those to your plan. So your project plan should include the tasks that will require for you to implement the software. And breaking out the tasks and getting updates is called status reporting. This will help you assist you in measuring the health of your project. So once you actually have your task and your status reporting together, you would continuously monitor your plan. So don't think that just because you have a delay, every project will have a delay. Every project will have something that's unknown, and every project will have resource constraints. So you should also build time in for those particular things. And even if you haven't built time in, you should plan for that. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to the moderator, and we will go to our panel.
All right, and I think we had some questions of our panelists, and I believe those are on the next slide. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and Phillip, I will let you ask these questions of our panelists, Jean
Sure.
and Heidi.
So Jean and Heidi, I think Heidi Cresta is an operations leader, and Jean is a IT director. Am I correct?
That is correct, Phillip.
All right. So what technology solution did you implement?
Heidi?
Sure, I'll go. So we actually have purchased and designed a custom solution. We did not buy an off-the-shelf product. We have been working for the past 3 years on a custom database for our needs. And we use a software called FileMaker Pro. It is a software that's known for its flexibility and ease of use. It's actually owned by a subsidiary of Apple. And it is actually the same software that we have used. For those of you that are not familiar with DPPC, we are an APS agency in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but we're a little bit of a different animal than most APS agencies in that we kind of fill the gap between Child Protective Services and Elder Protective Services, and we only work with a population between 18 and 59 that have a disability. So Massachusetts has a bifurcated system in that there is the Executive Office of Elder Affairs and the DPPC, and we operate independently. So DPPC was established in 1987, and at that time we had what I would call a homegrown database. It was created by a staff member of the DPPC who had no IT experience and used the FileMaker product to develop our database way back when. But back in the late 80s, FileMaker had no real relational capabilities. It was originally a DOS application, so it wasn't until I think the mid 90s that FileMaker introduced some new relational and scripting features, but DPPC did not have the money nor the manpower to rebuild at that time. And when we were fortunately awarded this grant 3 years ago, we decided that we were going to, from the ground up, rebuild our database. We started from scratch, and we did a lot of research before we decided to retain the FileMaker product. And, you know, Gene can probably jump in a little bit too. It was not a decision that we took easily, but we did stick with FileMaker. I don't know, Gene, if you have anything to add to that.
Yes, I certainly do. Thank you, Heidi. FileMaker was really the best solution, the best custom solution for our organization. Heidi spoke about looking at other products, which we did visit. However, we needed to select a product that would meet our operational needs, that would really be geared towards our business, the way we conduct business, and simply buying an off-the-shelf solution and changing the way we do our business to fit that just wasn't a viable option for us. So far, FileMaker has worked fantastically, and as we continue building and nearing the completion of our build, any additional changes that we're requesting now, having the flexibility to just go in and make it, and not having to wait for a maintenance period, or, you know, as Heidi mentioned, with it being so easy to develop on the surface, if you needed to make a simple change, you can go ahead and do that. And it's not a heavy lift where you would need the experience of an advanced developer on site, or so much of an advanced IT specialist who focuses on database development, because FileMaker allows you to manage changes right on the surface, and that will propagate its changes down without having to lift a heavy finger, I should suggest. But certainly that's the solution we went with, and it was the best solution for the needs of our organization, the needs of our business, and I'm really happy we made that choice. Looking at it on the other side, now that we're nearing completion, because as we go into some of our next questions, there were challenges along the way, but now that we're at the tail end of this project, we can look back and say, wow, there wouldn't be any other product that we could buy off the shelf that would have been able to meet the needs of the way FileMaker is meeting the needs for our agency.
That's wonderful to hear. And you jumped in and we started talking about challenges. So I'll stay with you, Jane. What are some of the challenges, and Heidi, I would expect you to jump in after. What are some of the challenges you came across?
Yeah, certainly. From a technology standpoint, you know, our system is probably a lot different than yours, and Heidi can speak about how we differ in a way. But from a tech side, my IT model is sort of decentralized. We had to rely heavily on some of the state IT systems to propagate access down to us. So it really delayed some of the changes that we could have made and how quickly we could have made them, because the central IT needs to oversee connections to their Amazon web space. Sometimes there was issues in getting firewalls to open up, and completing the connection between an Amazon server with an Insight location that is separate from headquarters, which is miles away from where we are. There was just a little bit of a challenges through that, but overall, if that wasn't in the way, I believe the connection would have been a lot more seamless. Also, we were deciding whether to go from a Linux instance of FileMaker versus a Windows instance of FileMaker, and what does that mean in terms of the availability of the product, the availability to back up the product and restore it. I hope this technical jargon doesn't throw you off too much, but just from a centralized IT model, if we didn't have to go through an additional middleman to get what we needed to get done, it would have been one of the it would have been a point that we could have striked off, knowing that that integration would have been a lot more seamless for us. Heidi, do you want to talk a little bit more about how our system might be a little disjointed compared to others?
Sure, and I think probably one of the biggest challenges that we face is, just to refer back to how I described DPPC's structure. So DPPC is an independent agency, but we have 3 other agencies within the Commonwealth that actually act as our agents, and they conduct investigations under our statutory jurisdiction. So while their investigators may act as our agents and they are conducting investigations for us, they're not our employees, and they're different agencies and they have their own systems. So for us to buy a product and expect that all of that pool of investigators would buy into that product was not possible, because they are in fact 3 other agencies. So we needed to take that into consideration
In our design.
when we were choosing a product, and also realizing some of the limitations, because the other 3 agencies do not use FileMaker like we do. They are not using our database. They do use it in another manner, and I guess I'll kind of speak a little bit to another challenge, and that is scope creep. Everybody should be prepared for scope creep. You need to do a really thorough discovery when you first start the project, but I can pretty much guarantee you that you won't think of everything. And you underestimate your needs, right, Gene?
That's absolutely correct. You know, factor in for scope creep, whatever you're factoring, maybe double or triple it, because it's going to happen. You may think you know everything you need to know to go in and to make this project successful. But the reality is, as you dive in further, you're going to get introduced to new features, new ideas, new bells and whistles. And there's going to be parts of the project that are going to challenge what you think you know. Okay, it's going to make you want to think about things differently. And as you start to think differently, you start to rewrite your procedures. You know, I put down a line that says to revisit and rewrite and return to all of your operational procedures as quickly as you can as you go into a project like this, because the project is going to challenge everything that you know. All right, so just in combination with the scope creep, it's going to expand your project to places that you just didn't plan to go. But I guarantee you, if you do go there, it will be well worth it. But for it to be well worth it for you, you have to factor in the potential for scope creep, and to ensure that there's enough budget available, right, to tackle that scope creep.
Thank you. And an example of that is we opened up a different component of FileMaker to our external partners. And what we did is we designed investigations forms that they could work on a web-based version of our database, separate from our client database, did not require individual licenses for all of these users, because then you get into the cost of licenses. So essentially now we have all investigators from all 4 agencies working on one form, on a web-based form, which we immediately receive once they submit it and complete it. So even though they work for other agencies, we've been able through this project to bring them more under our umbrella, for lack of a better term.
You'll also want to create buy-in with them. But also internal buy-in as well. I don't know if your situation is like ours, but as Heidi mentioned, we're working with 3 other agencies. So one of the other challenges that we had was getting those other agencies to buy into the fact that we're just going to be using one centralized system now to complete investigation reports. And then from there, of course, these reports can get fed into their business systems. But this idea that, wow, there's this one central location that they can all go to now, was a little bit of a challenge for them at first, but I think they all got it now, right, Hyde?
Yeah, I think so, for sure, for sure.
Yep.
And I'll throw out a huge challenge for us, which I don't think we have still yet fully solved, is the challenge of migrating data from the old database to the new database. And I am when I speak of the old database, DPPC's old system was actually a compilation of, I believe, 34 separate databases. Because way back in the late 80s, FileMaker did not have relational tables. It was not a relational database. So every time we had a new process, someone would create a new database, and they didn't all speak to each other. So the logistics of migrating information from 34 separate databases to a new single relational database has been really challenging. So we had to step back, rethink what was important to migrate and maybe what wasn't as important to migrate. And we did a partial migration, and we're still working and discussing what else would need to be migrated.
Yeah.
We kind of have a workaround in that the developer built in a means for staff to connect directly to either the old system or the new system at the click of a button to just facilitate them toggling between both.
You would think that with a project like this, you can start to say, well, we're going to move forward and we won't need to look behind, but you may need to, right? So don't discard your old data. Certainly archive it, but you may come to a point where you have to be selective about what data you move over, because moving data in itself can be very costly. All right. So certainly make a business decision on the importance of whether that data should be moved forward, or if we can or if you could continue from here on, right, while still having access to the data before. Our developer did a fantastic job of making sure that we still have access to that data if we ever need to go back. So it was good of us to make sure that was incorporated as well. And I'd like to add one more challenge that we face, Heidi, is really around stakeholder management. It's really important that you decide who your key stakeholders are, both from an operational to IT and to a lower staff level. You know, everybody who's affected by this project needs to be involved. And even if you limit it just to your management, supervisor, and executive teams, you know, it's important that you also ask them for who they believe their key stakeholders are in their departments to help bring this project to fruition, right? So always create seats at the table for everyone whose hands are involved in a project of this magnitude.
I'll jump in again. Heidi, what are the lessons learned? I know you told me a couple of things. I'm eager to have you talk about your lessons learned.
Sure. As Jean mentioned, if possible, always budget for more than you expected, because scope creep will happen. And again, there are things that you will not have thought of, and you will realize there are some other improvements and efficiencies that you can make as you begin to learn more through this process, and you'll want to take advantage of them. And I remember back 3 years ago, probably, Maria Green saying to me, make sure you build in a lot of IT hours. She said it to me, I don't know how many ways, and she was so right. You just need to really be clear in the amount of IT hours you need, but also the amount of resources and the amount of time commitment you're going to need from your staff, your own staff, from you know, all the various facets of operations. And again, I would go back to the discovery process. Be very, very thorough and very thoughtful after you discuss with all of your stakeholders and get your team, your doers at the table. Be as thorough as possible during the discovery process.
Another lesson that I believe was learned is when it comes to selecting a product, I mean, vet multiple products, but when you finally find the product and you believe it's the best product for your agency or organization, trust that that product is going to deliver on its promise to give you what you need. But more importantly, right, is to trust the business leaders, the operational leaders in the position to deliver this product home. Okay, it's not going to be an easy ride. It's going to be bumpy because you're essentially rebuilding a home. You're rebuilding a brain in a way, right? You're reconstructing an organic structure in a way. All right, it's all happening and transforming right before you. But your leaders, your business leaders, your operational leaders, and your IT leaders are all going to help deliver this home. So make sure you deliver confidence in them so that they can make that happen.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Jean. And I think for us, I think we were lucky. It wasn't necessarily a lesson learned. I think we were very, very fortunate in that we entered into a relationship with or a company that's all they do is FileMaker. They are FileMaker specialists, and I think we've been very lucky to build the relationship we have with them. So you know you need to find the right vendor, you need to find the right developer to help you with your project. And we did discuss, you know, getting buy-in and having all the people at the table, but I think for me a lesson learned is, while you want the right people at the table, don't have more than necessary, because that complicates the development process. I think you have to have some control over what gets presented to the developer, because the more people in the kitchen, the more expensive it gets and the more development hours you're blowing through.
Heidi, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, just be on the lookout for that, because you need to build in a system to manage all the requests that are going to come in, and those requests have to be filtered. Okay, and it doesn't mean that all requests will. It doesn't mean that every request that comes in will be fulfilled. Okay, but the greater whole, the greater picture of these requests needs to be fulfilled, because those pieces are vital, are critical to the success of the project. Right, and if time permits or if budget permits, those other additional requests could potentially be revisited. Right, but it's important that one of the lessons I believe I learned through this is delivering on your communication. Right, you've heard it time and time again that you need to communicate. Well, when a project like this, you really need to over communicate. Even if it includes holding town halls, the emails that you send, you contact the people directly via phone, or the people who are affected directly by the business process, asking if they understand it, or if they understand the recent change that was made and how it affects them. Sometimes you have to hold the person's hand and bring them to the table and say, hey, let's discuss this, because this is going to be a huge impact on your business processes. So always overly communicate no matter what, because the more people who can understand what's going on and how it impacts them, the greater of a success this project will be as you go into it.
Did you all have any enhancements, Heidi and Jean?
Say that again, Phillip?
Do you all have any enhancements after you all have implemented your solution?
We're actually still, we haven't yet put a pin in it, to tell you the truth, because you know, this portion of our grant is complete, but we have been fortunate to have some money in our budget to continue with some additional development, and we are continuing to build enhancements because we've found it to be such a fantastic solution for us. And it's like, okay, what else can it do for us? How else can we improve efficiencies for the investigators or for our oversight officers? What can we do to just improve operations overall? And we're actually, just today we had a meeting, we're going to build a new component to this database to track all of our trainings and outreach. We're doing such a large volume of trainings to you know, various stakeholders, that we want to have one single place to track all of these, and this will be a great place to do it, and to be able to maybe link it to a particular investigation that resulted in possibly a recommendation for training. So there are always enhancements. We haven't really wrapped it up with a bow yet, Phillip.
Yeah, but Phillip, just so you can understand, like the project is really near completion. It's just, you know, with the additional funding that we have and the additional options that, or the flexibility the product allows, we're just like, hey, maybe we can add this addition or this type of enhancement or this type of improvement. You know, Heidi didn't mention it, but one of the other things that we recently rolled out was our online reporting. This was not something that was available before to us. All the reports used to come in via phone and written. Now it comes in via web and written and phone, right? It's a fantastic product because of the flexibility it allows us to scale. One of the biggest things is you want a database product that's going to allow you to scale as your business needs grows and changes.
Right.
So be flexible with your selection. One of the things that we learned, you may not know it now. You might say, hey, I want the product to do exactly what it does now, but better. But you need to define better. And if you can't define better, go into a project like this with the hopes that better, whatever is delivered in the form of a technology, affords you the flexibility to expand it and change it on the fly. Also, find a product that will allow for easy transfer, easy knowledge transfer. So essentially, when we officially wrap this up and put the bow on it, as Heidi mentioned, some of the changes, Heidi and I will be able to go in and do them. And I'm not a developer, If I need to change a value list, I'll be able to go do that. If I need to add like an additional check option here, I'll be able to go do that. Certainly, there are some more advanced features we'll have to contract our developer for, but the product is designed to allow the end user to make surface level changes that doesn't affect the full architecture of the solution. But once again, if that's needed, we can build that into any service contract that we have or maintenance contract that we have with our developer going forward. But I'll tell you, it's been an exciting project to be part of, and seeing how it's come to fruition and how easy people are using it now because they've been using it for a while has been marvelous to see.
Yeah, and I want to also go back to something Phillip had mentioned earlier, and we learned from our prior experience with our old system how to control data because of the errors that we saw. So we built those controls in. Folks are choosing from a value list of cities and towns. Folks are entering a zip code, and it's, like most systems do, pre-populating the town. We have more controls in place to control bad data. And I also want to go back to Jean's point on communication. If there is one lesson, I think that would be it, is communication, 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 and recognizing that frontline staff especially are experiencing a lot of anxiety over this major change. And I think, over communication helps reduce some of that anxiety.
Well, with that said, I wanted to make sure we get enough time in for question and answer. I'll turn it back over to our moderator to moderate the questions.
Certainly, I'd be happy to do that. So now is the time to ask questions. If you have them, you can type them in the questions box, and we will get to them in turn. So one question from someone in the audience: how do we decide what to make required and what to make optional fields in our system? Any advice on what should be a required field or an optional field?
Well, from my experience, okay, Heidi, you can go on.
No, from my experience, and I'm speaking because we recently just rolled out our online reporting forms. It would be nice to have a lot of field validation and have many fields required, but you have to really recognize, is it possible that information will always be available? And we don't want the staff to get stuck in, where they can't move forward. So from my experience, you have to be really careful which fields you want to force to be required. And I would get input from frontline staff on that and how it's going to impact their workflows.
Good advice.
And I would also say, just to add to what Heidi has just mentioned, is assess your business processes and your workflows. Decide what is required for the work to be completed. Yeah, you don't want your staff to be stuck, but in order to move the report forward or the process forward, what's that specific requirement that is absolutely needed to prevent the user from having to go back and get it?
Yeah. Great. Phillip, did you have anything to add, or do you think they covered it?
No, I think they did an excellent job, and especially with adding your process. And so in terms of your process being the driver of your requirement, what makes your process work would be what I would say as a required field.
One question for Heidi and Jean, because it sounds like your software handles quite a few tasks, and this may not apply to you, but if you have a registry, does the software handle the registry entries as well?
Interesting. That was another enhancement that we hadn't expected. for those of you that are aware or not, DPPC, there was a law that just went into effect at the end of July, where DPPC is now hosting an abuser registry. And we have a separate product, a separate platform that actually houses the registry, where people go in to check the registry. But as far as the workflow and the registrable abusers that we track, that is all done within our FileMaker database. We're flagging them. We have certain notifications that we are required to send out when someone is either found guilty of registrable abuse, or the petitions and the appeals and all of that we built and is being tracked in our new database. And that was an enhancement that we were not expecting, and we built out in the last few months.
Sure.
I also want to add, to follow up with what Heidi mentioned, our product was actually one of the products we were looking for to house the full registry. However, once again, because of this decentralized IT state that the Commonwealth is sort of in, we wanted to integrate with a different business system at a partnering agency, and we had limitations with our product to do that. So we end up going with a different product, but we came to learn that the different agency just didn't want to play ball in a way. They were going through a transfer of their systems from AWS to Microsoft, and they could not take on the additional task of helping us integrate with them. So the deciding factor was around that, why we did not select our existing application, our existing database application, to fully build out this registry in it. So we went elsewhere.
Gotcha.
Right, but our database actually houses the information that gets pushed to this other solution.
Oh,
yep.
Great. Well, I know about half the states, or close to half the states, have some sort of abuse, perpetrator abuse registry, so I thought that might be a good one to ask. And then another question that just occurs to me that didn't come from our audience, because here at the APS TARC, we've had a few questions about assimilating certain assessment tools or embedding certain assessment tools into software. Did you have any experience with that, where you wanted to actually put in an assessment tool that your field people would use to assess abuse or cognitive status or what have you?
We do have an assessment tool that is built into our intake form. So we actually didn't mention, DPPC is responsible for a 24/7 hotline to report abuse. And after hours and on holidays, we contract with a vendor who answers our hotline for us. They are also working in a web direct version of our database. So when they get a call, someone reports abuse, they enter it onto a web-based version, and we have immediate access to that information. So if it's an emergency after hours, we see it live, which is a huge improvement over what we had. But on all of our intake forms, where folks are documenting the report of abuse, at the very tail end of that intake is an assessment tool to assess risk and determine what actions need to be taken, how soon we need to respond, etc. That's part of our intake form.
Yeah. Heidi, we also built in, and Heidi, you'll be better able to help me deliver this information, but when the intake form is being completed, depending on the type of abuse you select, right, it gives you specific questions that you could ask the caller. Is that correct, Heidi, if I'm saying it correctly?
Yeah, so we have scripted different scripts depending on the nature of the abuse being reported.
Thank you.
So depending on what the type of abuse is being reported, as the operator or the hotline specialist clicks this type of abuse, it opens up a particular set of scripted questions. So that was part of this build as well.
So I hope that helps with the assessment question. That's what I wanted to tie in.
Very interesting. Let's see. Here is a question for one of our participants. Is the intake form completed by the public or is it just internal?
So we have our own intake form where our staff are entering information from a phone call, but we also just opened up on our website about 2 weeks ago online forms where people can submit those forms online, they complete it, and we see it live on our end once it's submitted.
Great.
But there is a statutory requirement of mandated reporters to make an oral report to us. So the expectation is that they call the hotline and then they follow up with a written report.
Oh,
And folks actually print out a PDF and write on it, handwrite on it, like, the old school days. And now they can just go into this form and complete it, hit submit, and it comes to us.
great.
But they are not working in our system. They're working in, again, a web-based version of it that then pushes to us. We validate the information and bring it into our system. So it's really improved or increased our efficiency in that we're not retyping information.
Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions from our attendees, so I think we may be done with Q&A. If we can go to the last slide, just so there are. Oh, I'm sorry. One more slide. There is our contact information. You have our website there. You also have the email address where you can reach out to us, but you can get to us by going to our Contact Us page on the website that you see right here. And if you don't have a chance to jot it down, you can just Google APS TARC, T-A-R-C, and find us that way. Reach out to us at any time if you have any questions about your formula grant work or other work that you're doing in adult protective services. That's where we are here. We're here to help you in any way we possibly can. So thanks so much to our presenter, Phillip Calloway, and our panelists, Jean Frejust and Heidi Cresta today. We really appreciate all the information you've imparted on our attendees. And have
Andy,
a great.
can
Yeah,
I
sure.
offer us up if anyone has any questions or they think of something after this webinar? They are more than welcome to reach out to me or to Jean, or if they're thinking of embarking on an endeavor like this, we're happy to talk to them.
Great. Thank you for that offer. And you can reach them by reaching us if you want to. You can reach out to the APS TARC and we will forward it on to Jean and Heidi, and you can learn from their experience. Thanks for that. We appreciate that. All right. Well, I think at this point, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon on another webinar.
Great, thank you.